Now let's put all these techniques into some paintings. Now in this particular scene I want to bring across some nice atmosphere. It's not quite in the photograph, but this is really one lovely way of working in that you can change things, you can manipulate the atmosphere to exactly how you want it. So I'm using a wet into wet technique, wetting this paper down, and remember, wet it down thoroughly, keep brushing that water about, the brush is in contact with the paper all the time. And now for some colour, some French ultramarine and light red. And because this is wet into wet technique, then make sure that the mix is not as fluid, there's much less water in the paint, and brush this around. Now we've got in this scene some water, which in the photograph it's very rippled, it's all broken up, and I'm actually going to turn that into a still lake. So I'm bringing this wash and the reflections right down into the lake. Look how the paint softens as you brush it around. Keep the brush in contact with the paper and you get these lovely soft effects. Bit more tone now, just mixing up some slightly stronger paint and working back into this wash. It's still wet, so you can work back into it. As soon as it starts to dry off, you start to see the sheen on the paper disappearing, then that's the time to stop adding paint. It's really infusing some atmosphere in there, just using my imagination. This is really enjoyable to do. Okay, that's about it for that wash. That must be dry before I go any further with it. Now for a gradated wash for the background mountains. And I've just selected a slightly smaller brush. This is a size 8. I used a size 10 for the main wash. So selecting the brush according to the size of the wash, and I'm using the same colours. In fact, I'm going to use just the same colours throughout, so just 2 colours, French ultramarine and light red. And I'm going to work from right to left, so it's probably not as conventional as you might think, especially not the way that we worked through the wash exercises. That was really, the wash exercises are just to get you used to controlling paint on paper and watching out for the edge of the washes, the wet edge, keeping the wash nice and fluid. It doesn't mean to say you always have to work from top to bottom. Here I'm working from right to left, and I'll show you why as we work our way across here. Now where this wash is meeting the nearer mountain, I'm just softening that down with some clean water, so that's more or less the gradated technique. And it's quite pale, this wash. More water, less paint. Again, just softening into the nearer mountains. This will just stop the hard line appearing at the top of each section. Now, where this meets the left-hand side, just to try and give it some atmosphere, to blend it in with the sky, I'm just softening away with clean water, and that's going to allow the original wash to show through, give the effect that the mountain or the sky is overlapping the mountain. Okay, now for the third wash, and I'm just going to use a flat wash technique on here. Same colours again, but slightly stronger this time. The mountains are coming towards the foreground and the strength is increasing. That helps to give you the depth and the distance within the picture. Reloading the brush each time, making sure that the wash is really nice and fluid. And we've got a waterline down here, so make sure that that's nice and straight, using brush control there, a little bit more brush control to get that nice straight edge. Notice how my hand was in contact with the paper, drawing the brush along, using the side of the brush to get the straight edge. I'm just taking that through into the foreground mountain. I'll just soften that away so that it doesn't show too much through the next wash. And there's also part of this mountain showing up here. So I'm building up washes here, a bit here and a bit there. It doesn't really matter how you go about it so long as you follow the appropriate technique. So I'm making sure that each one is flowing and you get this lovely flat finish to the wash. Whilst I'm on with this wash, just diluting down the mix slightly, and we'll put in a reflection down here. Now I'm going to use a side to side motion of the brush, just leaving a highlight underneath. The side to side motion is to pick up on the action of the water. So you're using this full flow of the arm, finger in contact with the paper. Don't worry about the outline of the mountain not being quite straight. It's nice to get this curvy edge to it. It really does suggest the water. We'll soften that through at the end. And then I can let that dry. And now for the strongest mix on this painting, or the strongest part of the painting, and this is the foreground section. So I'm mixing up the paint quite strongly. Now I'm using tubes, and with tubes of paint you can really get some strong mixes very, very quickly, as opposed to using pans, which are the harder cakes of paint in a tin. It doesn't matter which you use, it's really down to personal preference. So this really must be quite strong to make this foreground area jump forward in the picture. And for this one I'm using, well, let me show you a variegated technique, which is quite different to the way that we use the technique in the exercise. This is just picking up different colours. Now here, look, you can see the light red running into the ultramarine and light red mix. So we're not creating a gradual change in colour, but more a quick shift in colour. And that's just by picking up bits of each colour and adding them to the wash, and it really brings a wash to life. It adds into there some real dimension and colour and tone, suggesting bits of detail maybe. Again, this straight line across the bottom. Now notice how I've painted the wash as far as I can, and then I'm putting in this line. Don't outline the section and then fill in, otherwise you'll end up with the hard line right the way around. And same technique as I used for the other mountain, just diluting this mix down slightly so that the reflection is slightly paler. And mirror this shape now. While this wash is still wet, I can brush in some of the colours that we've got above there. Look, so some red, wet into wet technique. Now, wet into wet doesn't necessarily mean you have to add wet paint to clean water. You can add wet paint to wet paint. Well, that's great. I think we really captured some atmosphere there just by using simple wash techniques.